Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition here on Channel 20. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss, and today we're going to be talking about the city's finances. Now, if that sounds a little dry and a little boring, I want you to know we're going to do our best to explain it in a way that is accessible and easily understood. I'm joined here by Dan Connolly, who's the city's financial advisor, and the man responsible for helping me and the city administration develop our 5-year financial plan. Dan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Part of the reason we're doing this show today is because there have been some statements made in the media by the city controller and the council president regarding their desire not to move forward with aspects of the city's 5-year financial plan, namely a planned refinancing of the city's debt at a lower interest rate, as well as a planned settlement agreement with the bond insurer AMBAC, which would, if we were to defease the stadium bonds for the city, provide us with a multiplier that would greatly reduce the amount that we owe on our forbearance liability. Now, those are big terms, and we need to go slow and explain what those mean, and that's part of why Dan's here with me in the studio today. Dan, let's start with just the big picture for the city. When we talk about the city's debt currently, what do we mean? What is the city's sort of long-term debt look like right now?
The city's debt includes several different components. It includes some general obligation debt that was originally issued in 1997. Those mature in 2022 next year, so those will be totally matured. It also includes a forbearance liability connected with that debt. Unfortunately, but widely known, in 2012, the city could not make its debt service payments on those obligations and accrued a forbearance liability with the bond insurer. So that liability is about $26.2 million now. The city also has other debts related to its history of fiscal distress, including guarantees and agreements related to a 1998 series of bonds. And the annual obligations on those liabilities are near $1 million or so. And there's also a general obligation guarantee on the stadium bonds, the Series 2005 bond issue that was used to construct and renovate the minor league baseball stadium in the city. So that's, in a nutshell, the city's debt profile.
And all told, that's a lot less than what the city had 8 years ago, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
The total city debt at that time, well over $600 million. It was one of the highest per capita debts anywhere in the country. And through a series of transactions, the city is really not only was able to bring that total debt number down considerably, but also over the past 8 years, we've routinely and regularly made payments for our general obligation debt. And the general obligation debt is the way governments function. You borrow money, you issue bonds for large-scale projects, and then over time you pay that back. The city has done that consistently since I've been in office, but as Dan mentioned, prior to that, during the time of receivership for the city did default on its general obligation debt. And it's really that money, which is what we now have to pay back. We finished, or we will be finishing next year, paying off the regular scheduled general obligation debt. But the money that we defaulted on back in 2012 and 2013, that is what we're calling the forbearance liability. That money has been accruing interest all these years at a relatively high interest rate, 6.75%. And it is now ready to come due. In addition to that forbearance liability, you mentioned that we also have these stadium bonds. And the stadium bonds, I think everybody should know, the city owns and operates the stadium where the Harrisburg Senators play. We do have a measure of revenue which comes in on a yearly basis from the senators, some parking, some amusement tax, other types of revenue that comes in from City Island, but that revenue never covers, is never enough to cover the full bond payments that we have to make on a yearly basis for those stadium bonds. And of course, last year, when we didn't have a season due to COVID, we really felt the effects of that because we didn't have any income coming in and we still had to make our stadium bond payments. So one of the things strategically when we talk about a long-term strategy for how to deal with this debt moving forward was we wanted to get out of the stadium business, and we looked at the possibility of paying off that debt early in an effort to sort of have the revenues which are coming in from the stadium be positive revenues for the city, allow us to reinvest those, and also get a benefit from that payoff by because those stadium bonds and this forbearance liability were both managed by the same folks. So who's AMBAC, and what exactly do they do?
AMBAC is the city's quote unquote credit enhancer. They provide what is called bond insurance. When a municipal issuer wants to issue debt, occasionally they will go to a bond insurer and pay a fee. And in exchange for that fee, that bond insurer promises to step in and make debt service payments in case the issuer cannot. The reason why a municipality would do this is because if investors see that the bond insurer will step in, they will have a lot more confidence that they will get repaid, and therefore will demand a lower interest rate. So municipalities get bond insurance in order to save on debt service costs.
So back in 2012, when the city couldn't make its general obligation payments, we called upon our insurer. Our insurer, AMBAC, stepped in and made those payments.
Correct.
So the bondholders got their money. It didn't come from the city. It came through AMBAC. And then AMBAC entered into an agreement at that time with the receiver of the city. This is when the city had lost its sovereign control under receivership, to pay that back as part of this forbearance agreement at the 6.75%. And then what is AMBAC's role with regard to the stadium bonds?
They, similarly to their role on the 1997 deal, provide credit enhancement on those stadium bonds. So if the city were not able to, after the revenue stream from that's directed towards those bonds is insufficient and the city cannot act on its guarantee, if that was the case, then AMBAC would step in, similar to the way they did on the 1997 bonds.
All right. So we have this entity in AMBAC which is involved in the city's debt portfolio, and let's talk a little bit about planning and strategy. One of the things that we've done here at the city is we've taken a long-term view. We've taken a multi-year, a 5-year view, if you want to say, about how to predict and manage the city's finances. A couple of years ago, when we got the extension of the city's taxing authority, we solved what was a structural imbalance in the city's overall general fund budget, which was that basically we didn't have enough tax revenue to cover our yearly expenditures. That has been solved, and so the question really is how do we manage this debt, and how does paying off the remaining debt not become so overly burdensome that that it affects our overall operations, our ability to do things like pave streets and roads or fix potholes or you name it. I think sometimes when the public hears debt and Harrisburg, there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to say, well, let's just not pay it back. Can't we declare bankruptcy, or can't we since a lot of these deals originally back in the 90s were done without a lot of public input, I think the public has never really felt invested in why did we do these deals to begin with? Why did we build a stadium that was going to lose money? Why did we insure a Verizon tower which was never going to pay itself back? Can you address the issue of why we have to pay these debts back?
As you mentioned it kind of in the lead-in, most municipalities go to capital markets and borrow money in order to fund capital projects, your infrastructure, things that the city needs to provide essential services to its residents, infrastructure that's got a long life. In order to, fund that, you borrow money and you pay them back over, a long-term period of time. If the city does not repay these debts, its access to the borrowing markets will be crippled. So just ignoring these debts and deciding not to pay them is simply not an option.
Not an option moving forward, especially if we want to be able to have the resources to be able to address and tackle some of the big infrastructure issues that face the city, whether it's our the hundreds of millions of dollars that we need to do for stormwater upgrades, or whether it is just the $100 million that we need to do to repair our roads, not to mention big infrastructure projects like Paxton Creek or the Division Street Bridge, or you name it. So back to the 5-year plan. So when we're talking about planning for the city's finances, when we hired you a few years ago, one of the first things that you were tasked with doing was helping us manage this in a sort of longer term strategic way, rather than sort of living paycheck to paycheck or year to year, which the city had for a long time. And I think it's important to emphasize that these concepts that we're talking about today, the negotiations with AMBAC to reduce the overall forbearance liability, or the concept of doing a refinancing, these aren't new concepts, right? These have been concepts that we've been discussing about now for several years as part of the 5-year plan.
And before that, even with the Act 47 plans, there were recommendations in the plan to take steps to negotiate an amended settlement agreement with AMBAC, to take steps to establish a credit rating, to take steps to re-enter the debt markets so that the city can, borrow to fund some of the capital needs that you were just referring to. The city hasn't done a capital borrowing in years and years. So that those have been long-term goals of the city now for quite some time. They were outlined in the initial drafts of the 5-year plan a couple of years ago. They're mainly still just goals, because as you mentioned, the city's limited taxing authority was really a big obstacle in order to go back to the debt markets and giving investors comfort that we'll be able to make our debt service payments on a new issue. When that was resolved, about this time last year, actually, it was sort of like, okay, we can take more concrete steps now. And that was, very, very clear. That was immediately inserted into what became the 2020 5-year plan, even though it wasn't adopted until the spring of this year. But in every draft and in every interaction we had with the ICA, basically, it was a clear objective.
Okay, we better back up and explain what the ICA is too, because that is another relatively new entity. But this intergovernmental cooperation agreement, to which you are the city's representative designee, is an independent board which basically exists to approve that 5-year plan and provide some measure of input and oversight into the long-term financial planning for the city, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This city is required to produce a 5-year plan, that demonstrates its ability to balance budgets and maintain a strong fund balance or adequate fund balance over a number of years. We do that by examining historical revenue and expense trends, anticipated expenses going forward, anticipated capital needs, and develop an action plan in order to demonstrate the ability to meet the city's obligations.
So that 5-year plan, which was approved by the ICA, and that called for the negotiations with AMBAC and the refinancing that we're going to discuss today.
That's correct.
And so nothing is new. What is new, and City Council certainly knew about that plan. They had approved those concepts repeatedly in the past, and they even approved the professional services contracts for some of the professionals that were going to work on the refinancing and certainly your contract to work on the negotiations with AMBAC, right?
Yep, that's right.
So the question is, what happened? How can we go from a publicly vetted 5-year plan, which everyone seemingly agrees upon, which is clearly ratified as being in the best interests of the taxpayer, to suddenly scrapping it all and saying we're not going to move forward with any more payments this year, which is basically what the controller just said at the last city council meeting and was referenced in an article recently by the Berg magazine. And I can only conclude that if it's not politics at the heart of it, then it's just a general misunderstanding because there hasn't been enough of an analysis done to really look at how this benefits the taxpayer. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today was so that you could walk us through the numbers, because the numbers are clear. There is a
complicated, if not
complicated,
clear.
but clear in that there is a taxpayer benefit by following forth and moving forward with the original plan as it was set out. So, Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you to look at a pretty complicated slide there and to walk the viewers through it. I think we've talked a little bit generally about it, but basically, how should people read this slide?
Okay. Well, there's quite a bit going on right here. We modeled 6 different scenarios. 3 of the scenarios do not take into account any of the benefits from the amended settlement agreement with AMBAC.
All right, so let's pause for a minute. All right, so currently the controller and the council president are saying no more payments this year. That would mean no refinancing, no agreement with AMBAC. What is the agreement with AMBAC? Before we look at the numbers and we talk about how it would benefit the taxpayer, what is this agreement?
The agreement calls for the city to secure material discounts up to about $3.3 million of discounts on its forbearance liability in exchange for defeasing the stadium bonds, essentially
Paying them off.
paying them off, and making additional prepayments towards the forbearance liability. Up to $4 million, the city is getting a 38% discount on the forbearance liability.
Now, hold on. So we owe money to AMBAC. We have an agreement to pay it back, and you're saying that they are willing to reduce that amount owed if we pay it off more quickly than proposed? Why would they do that?
AMBAC is managing its own exposure. It's got a wide municipal portfolio, and it's part of their risk management strategy. So if we pay off these liabilities sooner, their exposure formula approach is more what they're looking for.
Right. And we don't have to get into the whole history of the negotiations and why, but in general, what you're saying is that they've agreed if we execute this deal and we do it by the end of the year, because there is a time clock ticking, which is why we're having this conversation. If we do what the controller says and we do what the council president says and we don't do anything by the end of the year, we lose this opportunity. But if we do make the payment by the end of the year, we will end up paying less on the liability than we otherwise would have to pay back.
That's correct, and that's a key term of the agreement, is that the stadium bonds need to be defeased before December 31st, and we only get credit on prepayments made before December 31st. So anything after that, we miss out on the benefit.
Okay, so that's what we mean by the AMBAC agreement. So if we don't do the AMBAC agreement, which is what I think your first 3 scenarios on your slide show, if we follow the advice of the controller and the council president and we don't move forward with the AMBAC agreement, what happens?
Well, walking through the slides here, each column showing the scenarios represents at the top the gross outflows of the combined forbearance liability and stadium bonds for each scenario. So if the city were to repay, to forego the agreement and make a one lump sum payment towards the outstanding balance of the forbearance liability, and then, of course, cover the remaining debt service on the stadium bonds, the total gross outflows would be $31,882,000 and change.
And let's just say, and that's pretty much what the controller has proposed. He has proposed paying it off in cash, not taking advantage of the AMBAC agreement before the end of the year, not doing a refinancing, just simply using what we call the city's fund balance to sort of pay off that sort of gross outflow there of $31 million plus. Now, he said, well, maybe we could do it in 1 year, maybe we do it in a couple of years. He's not sure, and that's why you've given 3 scenarios, just to show. But I'm seeing red for each of those 3 scenarios. So what does the red indicate?
The red indicates the projected year-end fund balance under each one of these scenarios and these outlays to pay off the forbearance debt. We got to these year-end fund balances based on the projections in our 5-year plan. That's the purpose of the 5-year plan. Those revenue expense projections were vetted rigorously. I can attest to that. So we don't have to sort of come up with a new model. This is what we've been working on for months. A couple of adjustments I just want to note. The year-end projection is based on a revised projection after we had mid-year results and some other adjustments. And each one of these scenarios is also adjusted for changes in what would happen to your annual debt service going forward. If you pay off all the AMBAC forbearance debt, you're obviously not going to have to start paying it, make debt service payments on that in 2023 going forward. So all that is incorporated here.
All right, but here, people watching at home and they see this red. I mean, how do you have red? I mean, if you use up all your fund balance, meaning you use up all the savings in the bank, and you still owe in estimated there in year 2021 another $1.7 million, where does that money come from? The delay expenditures. There's you'd have to cut the budget.
Yeah.
You'd have to cut the budget. You'd have to lay people off. You'd have to not spend on essential services. And I can tell you there's not a lot of fat in that budget. And that's more money, than we're proposing on a yearly basis for many infrastructure projects. And then look at that number jump up in 2022 to over $7 million. Can you, as the city's financial advisor, could you talk about what it would mean to suddenly have to cut $7.7 million from a budget?
Well, it would be almost near where the city was before getting the extended taxing power
right.
extended. It would be crippling to.
We would have created our own fiscal cliff. I mean, the cliff that we just solved, that we just prevented us from falling off of, we'd be putting right back and having us fall right back off.
And I would just add,
self-inflicted.
That's to get to zero.
Yes, right.
Not
to have a savings at all.
Yeah, it's generally recommended, a common municipal management best practice, to maintain a fund balance level equal to about 2 months of expenditures. That's that fund balance target line at the bottom.
Well, don't we have a fund balance policy?
The city does have a fund balance policy.
And council adopted that, right?
Yeah.
So why would they be advocating a financial position that would violate their own fund balance policy?
I don't know if they are or not. Maybe
they must not understand the numbers. I mean, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they don't understand the numbers. But that is that's just a massive hole to self-inflict and dig upon yourself, and I'll note that red is still there strongly, even if you go to a 3-year cash repayment, right? So talk about first of all, as you say, that's to get back to zero. Why do we want to have a rainy day fund or a fund balance? I mean, I can say, and I'll say, you can address it from maybe a credit rating and a financial markets perspective, but just from a city perspective, if we didn't have cash on hand, we would not have been able to address the COVID crisis in the way we did. We wouldn't have been able to get money on the street for businesses at critical times, or for renters, or for others. And that gave us the flexibility that we wouldn't have had if it had been that crisis had hit us 7 years ago and we didn't have any money in the bank and we were struggling to make payroll. So just from a functioning standpoint, it's necessary. But why is it necessary to have a balance if, in terms of future borrowing and interest rates and credit rating?
Liquidity, particularly for a city that is emerging from fiscal distress. And, if you look at the projections, the city's best days are, look to be ahead. But there is still, it is still emerging from fiscal distress. So for Harrisburg.
Well, this looks fiscally distressed. Your scenarios 1, 2, and 3 look fiscally distressed.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're not going to be going down that path. But frankly, if the city takes the course I was outlined in a 5-year plan that demonstrates the ability to maintain adequate fund balance and cash on hand to address unanticipated expenditure needs and so forth, the city will be in a very strong fiscal position and will be able to go to the credit market or credit markets to secure lower cost financing.
Right. Well, just on the very surface of it, if following the controller's advice and the council president's advice, looks like we would put the city into financial distress, having just emerged from it. And it's the type of financial mismanagement which really harkens back to where the city was years ago and not where the city's been going. And it does veer off course from what was already approved as the 5-year plan. So the real question is, why? Why have we decided to veer off course? And I won't speculate about that right now on the show. I want to drill down on the numbers and look very specifically. You have a number there which I'd like you to talk about for a minute. You have a gross outflow and you have a present value outflow. And I wondered if you could explain to viewers the difference between a gross outflow and a present value outflow, or what present value basically means when we're talking about dealing with the city's debt.
Sure. Present value is the idea that a dollar in the future is not worth the same as a dollar today. It's also referred to as time value money. A dollar in the future may be worth less because of inflation, because you can invest a dollar today. It is a common financial concept. It's frankly a basic financial concept that we use in this sort of analysis every day.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to compare both the gross and the present value costs of doing what the controller is recommending, which is there on the first 3 scenarios, or doing what the 5-year plan recommends, and what we certainly hope will do. And if you look at scenarios 4, 5, and 6, you see first you see a repay with cash, and then you see sort of repay with a refinancing. And that's important because we're talking about 2 different financial concepts which have been which were on course but have veered off course with the controller and city council's latest decisions. One has to do with the potential long-term refinance, and we'll look at those numbers. That scenario is 5 and 6. But the other has to do with why we wouldn't take advantage of this AMBAC deal, which has been put in place and part of the 5-year plan for a while. So if we follow the controller's advice and we don't execute the AMBAC deal, we don't spend any more money this year, and remember that deal has to be done by December 31st, and then we just pay it back with cash, how does the gross cost and the present value cost compare with for the city taxpayers with doing what the controller is suggesting?
It's significantly less. And we ran that scenario to show that the benefits of the AMBAC agreement far outweigh any acceleration on the payments of the forbearance debt without the discounts.
So when he says we can just wait and we don't have to pay anything this year, and we can just pay it off in cash next year. While it's true, we could just do that and we could just wait. It's going to cost us significantly more money. It's going to cost the taxpayer millions of dollars, especially if we look at a present value, apples for apples cost comparison.
To comply with the AMBAC agreement, there will require roughly a $9 million cash outlay to defease the stadium bonds and maximize the benefits of the prepayments on the AMBAC liability, the forbearance liability. And if you don't do that by the end of the year, you lose those benefits.
So I'm not seeing much of a comparison. I'm seeing millions of dollars in savings for the taxpayer, and that's just on the outflow side. Let's also look at how it affects the fund balance.
Right.
So you go from, if we take the controller scenario number one, not only are we spending more money to wait till next year, but we're devastating the city's fund balance, which means we're dipping in, we're cutting essential services, we're laying people off, we're not doing planned projects. Whereas, look at what happens to the fund balance under scenario 4 if we take advantage of the AMBAC deal, right?
What this is showing is that under any scenario, moving forward with the AMBAC agreement will result in less costs to the city. When we get to January, after complying with the agreement, and we have secured these benefits, the city can move forward in a way that will ensure its fiscal integrity, and it can maintain an adequate fund balance over the long term. I would recommend that the city put itself in position to do a refinancing and go through the evaluation process to determine the optimal mix of repaying the AMBAC debt with fund balance or refinancing proceeds to ensure that it can maintain a fund balance consistent with the target outlined in the 5-year plan, which is equal to about 2 months of expenses.
Right. So that's scenarios 5 and 6, which is the refinancing, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But just to emphasize the point on scenario 4, one more time, there is no question that it is in the taxpayer's financial interest to take advantage of the deal that we have with AMBAC and not just let it expire at the end of the year.
That is clear. That's 100% my recommendation.
And those are the numbers. They're right there. It's in black and white. It's even more of a savings if you use a present value calculation. And is this present value calculation some sort of a strange term? Is this a normal term in used in financial planning?
Absolutely. It is a common part of every refinancing analysis. Any comparison of two cash flows, always involves a present value comparison.
All right. So sticking with scenario 4 then, if we're going to take advantage of this and save the taxpayers millions of dollars, we have to get this done by the end of the year. That's what the agreement calls for. And we need to move swiftly. And one of the things that we will be introducing to City Council here in the next session is going to be a budget reallocation to maximize that multiplier, which is basically we already budgeted for a $2 million payment to AMBAC. We want to budget for an additional $2 million payment to AMBAC this year so that we can get the full advantage of that deal. You'll be there before council to be able to present and talk about that when that reallocation goes through. But so the public understands that's what we're trying to do. Now let's talk about the refinancing, because the refinancing was also supposed to occur this year. Since the council president objected, it's clearly not going to be able to, that part will not be able to occur before the end of the year, but it is something which could occur next year. And you run us through 2 scenarios which basically, instead of doing the full repayment in cash, show an advantage of a hybrid where you pay some in cash, but you also refinance some. And we take advantage of what are really pretty darn low interest rates. So can you walk us through scenarios 5 and 6?
Sure. Scenario 5 shows a high interest rate refinancing scenario. These were the same rates that we used in the 5-year plan, so I wanted to be consistent in this analysis. This was included in the analysis that was used to, in this alternative strategy, so to speak. So I just wanted to put that out there for the to be consistent. However, I think that is a very, very conservative rate, and we are in a low rate environment. I expect the city will achieve a much lower interest rate than the 4.8% that we have in that refinancing. Nonetheless,
but
it's still
interestingly, though, right? I mean, interestingly, it's still comparing present value costs. It's still cheaper to do a high interest rate refinancing than it would be to follow the controller's suggestion and do a 1-year cash repayment.
that's correct, based on our present value calculation.
I think that's astounding. Why would anyone object to swapping interest rates and getting a much lower rate when it's out there and when it's common and when a lot of people are taking advantage of that?
It is a very opportune time to access the borrowing markets. If the city were to pursue this path, it would also accomplish its long-term goals of establishing
Right.
a credit rating and securing millions of dollars of
Which we
savings.
have a responsibility to do because for future generations, we've got to get back into the markets. We have to have a credit rating. We have to be able to borrow responsibly. Those aren't crazy goals either. But not only is the present value cost less with the high interest rate refinancing, and to be clear, you think we can do much better, but we're being conservative. But look at the difference in the fund balance. Look at 16 million versus a deficit, right?
Right, that's exactly right, and that's the benefit of the refinancing, as we alluded to before. It allows you to secure savings while preserving fund balance at a level that gives you comfort that you can meet unanticipated expense needs and run the city without any disruptions.
Right.
I would just add that executing the AMBEC deal does not obligate a
Correct.
refinancing.
Two separate things.
Yeah, we can move forward and decide that, hey, we're in position that we can do some, pay a portion with fund balance or do a portion with refinancing. It doesn't obligate us to do the refinancing, but if we don't execute by December 31st, we lose all the benefits of the AMBEC deal.
That's right, and we could decide to do more of a hybrid. I mean, you can go on with endless scenarios if you want. For this graph, you've got plenty, but we could say we don't need 16 million. We're more comfortable with just sticking to the basic requirements of the fund balance policy. In which case, you could put more cash in the deal. Suddenly, the cost is even less. So that is a long-term cost. So that's a positive. That's a positive possibility here. And when we talked about, working, city council could still weigh in and there can still be a public conversation for exactly how much cash we want to leave on hand. And that would then bring up the other thing that controller is fond of saying, and I think rather irresponsibly, is just that, well, he doesn't have any insight into what the city's future costs are or what the city's future infrastructure needs are. And so when he gives this advice, it's sort of in the vacuum of all financial planning for growth for the city, for infrastructure, for all those needs. And we have to have that public conversation. So, if city council wants to put more money into road paving, or wants to put more money into green infrastructure, or wants to pursue a project like the Paxton Creek revitalization plan, dechannelization plan, then all of that costs significant cash, and we don't yet have a credit rating. We aren't yet in a position to be able to borrow for it, and we have to rely on cash. So all this goes hand in hand. And unless we have a serious conversation about these numbers, people aren't going to be able to make informed decisions. And that's pretty much what we've been trying to do here today. And I will note, today is Tuesday, and you offered to give this presentation to City Council sort of in response to the controllers, and their response to you was, no, not tonight. Maybe in the future, but not tonight. So we're on air here with you at home so that you can get the information that you need to be able to make informed decisions and have a better understanding of the city's debt scenario. I'm pleased to say that we're going to keep fighting. until the end of the year, and we're going to get this AMBAC deal done, objection or no objection. And I'm hopeful that we'll be in a position next year to take advantage of the strengths which the hybrid scenarios 5 and 6 really offer. Where's the ICA on this? Why are they not out there advocating to have the city move forward with the very 5-year plan that they approved?
Well, I'll be meeting with the ICA tomorrow and probably be able to, have a better answer for that at the time. I'm not exactly sure. It sounds like once these numbers were presented in July, they said, well, there's not going to be refinancing. We'll just move on. I'm not exactly sure.
Seems like that's really their whole reason for being is to be able to effectively advocate for what's in the city's financial best interest, and they've got a role to play in this. But hopefully your meeting with the ICA tomorrow goes well, and I encourage people to tune in and watch that as well. We're going to have the same numbers, same slide, same spreadsheet for them. And we will, of course, give this presentation to council when you're invited and able to participate. And I will say as well, for the public's knowledge, that we did just receive a court order that empowers us to move forward with that AMBAC deal one way or the other. Judge Ledbetter certainly understands city's finances and is in support of the proposal as we've described it. So. Dan, thank you so much. I think we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you'd like to sort of end with that you think is really at the heart of the matter here?
The heart of the matter is taking the steps necessary to maximize the benefit of this AMBAC settlement agreement, and then which doesn't obligate the city to do a refinancing, but puts the city in an optimal position to manage its finances in a way to achieve its fiscal goals. And the next most important immediate steps are to execute that agreement, defease the stadium bonds, and allocate the appropriate fund balance to make a $4 million prepayment on the AMBAC debt before the end of the year.
Okay. Well, Dan, we're lucky to have you as the city's financial advisor. Thank you for all that you do for Harrisburg, and thank you all for watching. I know it's a complicated issue with a lot of numbers, but this is important information. We're talking about millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars. We need to make sure that we're the right custodians of those and that we're shepherding them through a process which gets the greatest return for our residents and provides us with the most resources and that we can see to put into a high quality of life for our residents here in the city. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. And hopefully you'll continue to tune in Fridays at noon for our new Spotlight HBG show. Check that out every Friday at noon on Facebook Live, and then replaying right here on Channel 20. Thanks for watching.